Sometimes, what makes a person lose everything is not the wrong decision. It is the person they chose not to listen to. The night rain tapped softly against the thick glass of the most luxurious restaurant in the city. Golden lights reflected off crystal glasses, shimmering like promises that were never meant to be kept. Daniel Carter stepped inside, his perfectly tailored gray suit fitting him flawlessly, the Swiss watch on his wrist catching a cold, distant glow. He did not look at anyone. He did not need to. Men like him were not used to looking down. Emily Dawson stood in the corner of the room, a tray in her hands, her eyes still like the surface of a lake before a storm. She had seen men like him many times before, but never exactly like him. She stepped forward, light, precise. "Good evening, sir." Her voice was soft, but clear. Daniel gave a slight nod, his eyes still fixed on his phone. An email was opened. A deal. $500 million. Coffee. Black, he said, without looking up. Emily wrote it down, but her gaze paused. Not on him. On the man sitting across from Daniel. The partner. A German. She should not have understood what he had just said. But she did. Every word. Every rhythm. She turned away, but her steps slowed. Something was not right. When she returned with the coffee, the man's voice came again, this time lower. A short sentence. A keyword. Emily set the cup down. Her hand did not tremble, but her eyes changed. "Sir," she said quietly. Daniel did not respond. "Sir, they are not telling you the truth." This time he looked up. For the first time, his eyes met hers. Just for a second. Then he smiled faintly. Not a warm smile. A dismissive one. "Just bring the check when we are done." She stood still for a moment, then nodded. No more words. But as she turned away, her eyes were no longer the same. She was no longer just a waitress. She was someone who had just seen something that was about to happen and could not be stopped. Daniel signed the contract without hesitation, the pen gliding across the paper as if it had done this 1,000 times before. Because it had, deals were numbers to him, risks were calculations, and people were variables he believed he could always control. The German partner smiled. Too quickly, too precisely. But Daniel did not notice, or maybe he noticed and chose to ignore it, because confidence often sounds exactly like denial when it is spoken quietly. Emily stood by the service station, watching from a distance, her hands resting still on the edge of the counter. She did not move. She did not interrupt again, because she had already crossed the invisible line once, and that was enough. The room returned to its rhythm, glasses clinking, soft laughter, low conversations about money that could change lives. Daniel leaned back in his chair, satisfied. Another deal closed. Another victory added to a long list that had never truly been questioned. When the partner excused himself for a call, Daniel finally looked around. His eyes landed on Emily again, just briefly. Something about her stillness unsettled him. Not fear, not admiration. Something else, something he could not immediately define. He looked away first. The meeting ended, signatures exchanged, handshakes firm and practiced, the kind that meant everything and nothing at the same time. As Daniel stood to leave, Emily approached with the receipt, her movements calm, measured. "Is there anything else you need, sir?" she asked, her voice the same as before, neutral, professional, but her eyes held something that had not been there earlier, something heavier. Daniel glanced at the receipt, then back at her. "No," he said, then paused for a fraction of a second. "You were wrong," he added, not harshly, just as a statement. Emily did not react immediately. She simply nodded once. "I hope so," she replied softly, and that answer lingered in the air longer than it should have. Daniel left, the doors closing behind him with a quiet finality. Outside, the rain had stopped. The city lights reflected on wet asphalt like broken mirrors. His car door opened. He stepped inside, already moving on to the next task, the next number, the next deal, unaware that somewhere, in a language he did not bother to understand, the truth had already been spoken. The email arrived at 2:17 a.m., and it did not ask for permission. It did not knock. It simply appeared, cold and precise, like reality often does when it decides to finally introduce itself. Daniel stared at the screen in the dim light of his penthouse office. The city stretched below him, silent and distant. The subject line alone was enough to tighten something in his chest. Contract irregularities detected. He opened it, expecting a minor issue, a delay, something fixable, something within the boundaries of his control, but the words that followed did not belong to that world. They spoke of hidden clauses, of asset redirection, of legal traps carefully embedded beneath layers of formal language. It was not just a bad deal. It was a calculated setup. His company, Carter Holdings, was suddenly exposed in ways that numbers alone could not justify. Daniel leaned back slowly, his fingers still hovering above the keyboard. The room felt different now, heavier, quieter. The silence no longer belonged to confidence, but to realization. He replayed the meeting in his mind, every word, every gesture, every glance, and then, without warning, her voice surfaced, soft, controlled, almost easy to ignore. They are not telling you the truth. He closed his eyes briefly, not in regret, not yet, but in recognition, the kind that arrives before emotion, before acceptance. He stood up, pacing once across the room. His reflection followed him in the glass walls, sharp, composed, unchanged, and yet everything had shifted. His phone buzzed. Again, another email, then another. The situation was unfolding quickly now, faster than even he could anticipate. The control he had built his life on was slipping, not dramatically, not loudly, but quietly, like something that had already decided its outcome long before he noticed. Daniel stopped moving, his hand resting on the edge of the desk, and for the first time in years, he did not have an immediate answer, only a memory of a waitress, standing still, saying something he chose not to. Here, morning did not bring clarity, it brought confirmation. The reports came in layers, each one peeling back another piece of what he had signed. Legal teams called, analysts sent summaries, but the conclusion remained the same. The deal was compromised from the beginning, structured to appear legitimate while quietly shifting leverage away from his company. Daniel listened, responded, made decisions, his voice steady, his posture unchanged. But inside, something had fractured, not his confidence, not yet, but the certainty that had always supported it. By noon, the financial implications were no longer projections. They were real, assets frozen, negotiations collapsing, partners pulling back with polite but unmistakable distance, the kind that says everything without saying anything at all. Daniel ended the last call and stood by the window. The city below moved as it always did, indifferent, unaffected. He checked his watch, the same one he had worn the night before. The second hand moved with perfect precision. Time had not changed, only his position within it. He turned away from the glass, and without fully deciding, he reached for his keys. The drive back to the restaurant felt longer than it should have, not because of traffic, but because of thought, each moment stretched by the weight of what he was beginning to understand. When he arrived, the place looked exactly the same. Warm lights, quiet conversations, the illusion of control still intact for everyone inside. Emily was there, moving between tables, the same calm, the same quiet presence, as if nothing had happened, as if everything had not already changed. Daniel stood at the entrance for a second longer than necessary, then walked in, not as the man who had left the night before, but as someone who had finally realized that being right and being certain are not the same thing. Daniel did not sit immediately. He stood near the entrance, watching her, observing the way she moved, precise, efficient, unnoticed by most, respected by none, yet somehow more aware than everyone in the room combined. Emily turned slightly, as if sensing something. Their eyes met again, this time longer, this time without interruption. She walked over, her steps calm, unchanged. "Good afternoon, sir," she said, the same tone, the same professionalism, no trace of surprise, no question, just presence. Daniel looked at her for a moment before speaking. "You knew," he said, not accusing, not defensive, just stating something that had already settled inside him. Emily did not respond immediately. She placed a glass of water on the table, aligning it perfectly with the edge, a small gesture, but deliberate. "I heard enough," she said quietly. Daniel exhaled slowly, pulling out the chair and sitting down, the weight of the past 24 hours pressing into the silence between them. "Why did you say anything?" he asked, his voice lower now, less certain than before. Emily met his gaze, not challenging, not submissive, simply steady. "Because you asked for the truth, even if you did not realize it," she replied. Daniel almost smiled. but it did not fully form. "I did not ask you," he said. Emily shook her head slightly. "Not with words," she said, and that answer lingered, heavier than anything else she could have said. Daniel leaned back, his fingers tapping once against the table, a habit he had never noticed until now. "And you just understood all of that from one conversation?" he asked. Emily hesitated for a fraction of a second, not out of uncertainty, but out of choice. "Some patterns repeat," she said. "If you have seen them before." Daniel studied her more closely now, not as a waitress, but as something else, something he had overlooked. "You are not just a server," he said, and this time, it was not a question. Emily did not deny it, but she did not confirm it either. She simply continued doing what she had been doing before, standing still, present, unbothered by the weight of his attention. "What did you used to do?" Daniel asked, the question direct now. Stripped of the casual arrogance he had carried the day before, Emily glanced toward the window, where the light had shifted slightly, softer, quieter. "Risk analysis," she said, as if mentioning something ordinary. Daniel leaned forward, the words settling into place, connecting pieces he had not even realized were missing. "For who?" he asked. Emily shook her head lightly. "It does not matter anymore," she replied. Daniel frowned slightly, not out of frustration, but curiosity. "It matters to me," he said, and for the first time, it sounded genuine. Emily looked back at him, her expression unchanged, but her eyes held something deeper now, something that suggested history. "It mattered until it did not," she said. "Until I refused to ignore something I was told to overlook." Daniel understood that sentence more than he expected, not the details, but the meaning, the cost of seeing something and choosing whether to act on it. "And they let you go," he said. Emily almost smiled, but it was brief. "They made sure I could not go back," she corrected softly. The silence that followed was different now, not empty, but full of understanding that had not existed before. Daniel leaned back again, his mind moving through calculations, but not the kind he was used to. Not numbers, not projections, but people, decisions, moments. "You could have stayed quiet," he said. Emily nodded. "Yes," she replied. Daniel looked down at the table, then back up at her. "But you did not," he added. Emily's answer was simple. "No." And in that moment, the difference between them became clear, not in power, not in status, but in what they chose to do when the truth was inconvenient. The conversation did not need to continue, but it did, because something had shifted, something neither of them could ignore now. Daniel stayed longer than he planned, longer than his schedule allowed, longer than his old self would have tolerated. They spoke in fragments, not full stories, just pieces, enough to understand without needing to explain everything. Emily never asked about his loss. She did not need to. It was written in the way he spoke, in the pauses between his words. Daniel did not ask for her full history either. He understood that some things are not offered, they are earned, and he had not earned them yet. The restaurant moved around them. Customers came and went, conversations overlapped, but at their table, time felt slower, more deliberate. "What would you have done?" Daniel asked finally, the question that had been forming since he walked in. Emily did not answer immediately. She looked at him, measuring not the question, but the intention behind it. "Before you signed," she said. Daniel nodded. "I would have asked one more question," she continued. "Not to them," she added. "To yourself." Daniel frowned slightly. "What question?" he asked. Emily's voice remained calm. "Why do they need this deal more than you do?" Daniel went still, the simplicity of the question cutting deeper than any complex analysis. He had not asked that. He had assumed. An assumption had cost him more than he was willing to admit. And now, he asked, quieter now. Emily held his gaze. "Now you decide. What matters more," she said, "recovering what you lost, or understanding why you lost it?" Daniel did not respond immediately, because for the first time, the answer was not obvious, not immediate, not something he could calculate in seconds. Days passed, and the situation did not magically resolve. Losses remained, consequences unfolded, but something else began to change, not in the company, not in the market, but in Daniel himself. He returned to the restaurant again, and again, not out of habit, but intention. Each time the conversations grew deeper, not longer, just more precise, more honest. Emily never offered solutions unless asked, and even then, she spoke in observations, not instructions. She did not try to fix his world. She simply showed him where it had cracked, and that was enough. Daniel began to listen differently, not just to her, but to everything. Meetings changed, questions changed, the way he looked at people changed, slowly, almost imperceptibly, but undeniably. One evening, as the light outside dimmed and the restaurant grew quieter, Daniel placed his hand on the table, not tapping this time, just still. "You could have asked for something," he said. Emily looked at him. "For helping me," he added. Emily shook her head, a small movement, but firm. "I did not help you," she said. Daniel frowned. "You did," he insisted. Emily's eyes softened slightly. "No," she replied. "I just told you the truth." Daniel leaned back, considering that. And then, slowly, he nodded, because he understood now. Help can be bought, advice can be hired, but truth is given, and only if someone is willing to hear it. On the night, everything finally stabilized, not fully recovered, not completely fixed, but steady enough to stand again. Daniel sat alone at the same table where it had all begun, the same seat, the same view, but not the same man. Emily approached, placing a cup of coffee in front of him without being asked. He looked up, a faint smile forming, not confident, not controlled, just real. "You were right," he said. And this time, it was not about the deal, not about the loss. It was about something deeper. Emily did not respond with words. She simply nodded once, accepting it without needing to hold on to it. Daniel looked at the coffee, then back at her. "I almost ignored you again," he admitted. Emily tilted her head slightly. "But you did not," she said. Daniel exhaled softly. "No," he replied. A brief silence settled between them. Comfortable, unforced, the kind that does not need to be filled. As Emily turned to leave, Daniel spoke one last time. "Why did you stay?" he asked. "Not about the restaurant, but about everything." Emily paused, just for a moment, then looked back at him, her answer quiet, almost lost in the ambient sound of the room. "Because someone needed to learn the difference," she said. Daniel did not ask what difference, because he already knew. The difference between hearing and listening, between power and understanding, between being right and being wise. And as she walked away, he watched her, not as a waitress, not as someone beneath him, but as the person who had changed the direction of his life, without ever raising her voice. And in that quiet moment, the lesson settled, simple, undeniable, lasting. The quiet ones are never truly ordinary.